spooky place.
They say music soothes the soul, but at St. Mark's Church in Lincolnshire, it does something far more chilling. Long after the living have left, the phantom notes of an unseen organist drift through the empty church, filling the air with a melody that shouldn't be played. And if you listen too closely, you might just hear it tonight, but don't expect to sleep soundly afterward. Before we begin, I request you to like the video and subscribe to the channel. On that note, let's begin. The Devil's Footprints in St. Pancras Churchyard. The story of St. Pancras Old Church in London is one of the most macabre and chilling tales from the 19th century, blending historical fact with supernatural folklore. The events that unfolded there have left an indelible mark on the collective imagination, and the legend of the Devil's Footprints adds an eerie layer to an already gruesome history. In the early 19th century, medical schools in London were in desperate need of cadavers for anatomical research and teaching. However, the legal supply of bodies was limited, leading to the rise of body snatchers, also known as resurrectionists. These grave robbers would dig up freshly buried corpses and sell them to medical institutions for profit. St. Pancras Old Church, with its large and often poorly guarded churchyard, became a prime target for these ghouls. During renovations in the 1820s, workers made a horrifying discovery. The churchyard had been systematically ransacked. Coffins were smashed open, and bodies were torn from their resting places, leaving the ground littered with bones and debris. The scene was one of utter desecration, with the sanctity of the dead violated in the most grotesque manner. The culprits were undoubtedly body snatchers, who had been plundering the graves under the cover of darkness. What makes the story of St. Pancras Old Church even more chilling is the supernatural twist that emerged shortly after the discovery. According to local legend, strange footprints began appearing in the snow around the churchyard. These were no ordinary footprints. They were described as cloven-hoofed, resembling the tracks of the devil himself. The prints seemed to appear out of nowhere, leading to and from the disturbed graves, as if marking the path of an otherworldly visitor. Witnesses claimed that the footprints were too precise and unnatural to be the work of an animal. Some even reported seeing a shadowy figure with glowing red eyes lurking near the churchyard at night. The legend quickly spread that the devil had come to St. Pancras to either punish the body snatchers for their sacrilegious acts or to protect the dead from further desecration. The idea of the devil walking among the graves added a layer of terror to an already horrifying situation. As the story of the Devil's Footprints gained traction, rumors of a curse began to circulate. Locals believed that the churchyard had been cursed by the spirits of the disturbed dead, angered by the violation of their eternal rest. Those who dared to trespass or disturb the graves risked invoking the wrath of these vengeful spirits, or worse, attracting the attention of the devil himself. Some claimed that the body snatchers who had robbed the graves met gruesome and untimely ends, their deaths attributed to the curse. Others reported hearing ghostly wails and moans emanating from the churchyard at night, as if the desecrated souls were crying out for justice. The eerie atmosphere of St. Pancras Old Church became the stuff of nightmares, and even the bravest of souls avoided the area after dark. Adding to the mystique of St. Pancras Old Church is the Hardy Tree, named after the famous novelist and poet Thomas Hardy. Before his literary career, Hardy worked as an architect's assistant and was involved in the renovation of the churchyard. During this time, many of the disinterred bodies were reburied elsewhere, and the headstones were arranged in a circular pattern around an ash tree. Over the years, the tree grew, enveloping the gravestones in its roots, creating a haunting and surreal monument to the dead. The Hardy Tree has become a symbol of the churchyard's dark history, with some claiming that it is haunted by the spirits of those whose graves were disturbed. Visitors have reported feeling an overwhelming sense of sadness and unease when standing near the tree, as if the souls of the dead are still trapped within its roots. The story of St. Pancras Old Church and the Devil's Footprints continues to captivate and terrify to this day. The churchyard has become a site of pilgrimage for those interested in the macabre, and the legend has inspired countless retellings in books, films, and folklore. Whether the footprints were the work of the devil, a hoax, or simply the result of overactive imaginations, they remain a chilling reminder of a time when the line between the living and the dead was perilously thin. The tale also serves as a grim reflection on the darker aspects of medical history, where the pursuit of knowledge sometimes came at the cost of morality and respect for the dead. St. Pancras Old Church stands as a monument to this unsettling chapter, its grounds forever haunted by the echoes of the past, and perhaps by something far more sinister. Years after the legend of the Devil's Footprints and the desecration of the churchyard, a new mystery emerges at St. Pancras Old Church. During routine maintenance of the church's ancient crypt, workers uncover a hidden compartment beneath the floor. Inside, they find a small, intricately carved wooden box, its surface covered in symbols that match those found on the headstones of the disturbed graves. The box is sealed with a rusted iron lock, and faint whispers seem to emanate from within. The discovery attracts the attention of Dr. Eleanor Hart, a historian specializing in occult artifacts, and Father Michael Byrne, the church's current priest. Together, they decide to investigate the box, hoping to uncover its origins and significance. However, as they begin their research, strange occurrences plague the church and its surroundings. Unexplained shadows dart through the halls. The air grows unnaturally cold, and the whispers grow louder, as if the box is calling to something or someone. As Dr. Hart and Father Byrne delve deeper into the history of the box, they uncover a dark secret tied to the church's past. The box is said to contain a cursed relic, a fragment of bone belonging to a notorious 17th century occultist who was buried in the churchyard. According to local folklore, the occultist made a pact with the devil to gain immortality, and his remains were sealed away to prevent his return. The symbols on the box are part of a binding ritual meant to keep his spirit trapped. However, the desecration of the graves by the body snatchers weakened the ritual, and the relic's power began to seep into the churchyard. The Devil's Footprints, it is revealed, were not just a warning, but a sign that the occultist spirit was stirring. Now, with the box unearthed, the binding ritual is on the verge of breaking entirely. As the days pass, the activity around the church becomes increasingly violent. Objects move on their own, the whispers turn into anguished screams, and shadowy figures are seen lurking in the churchyard. Dr. Hart begins experiencing vivid nightmares of the occultist, who warns her that his return is inevitable. Father Byrne, meanwhile, finds himself questioning his faith as he witnesses phenomena that defy explanation. The two realize they must act quickly to prevent the occultist spirit from fully awakening. They consult ancient texts and uncover a ritual that could reseal the relic, but it requires a sacrifice, a willing soul to take the place of the binding. As the clock ticks down, Dr. Hart and Father Byrne must decide whether to make the ultimate sacrifice or risk unleashing an ancient evil upon the world. In a climactic scene, Dr. Hart and Father Byrne perform the ritual in the crypt as the church is engulfed in a supernatural storm. The whispers grow deafening, and the shadowy figures close in, their eyes glowing with malevolent light. At the last moment, Father Byrne offers himself as the sacrifice, allowing Dr. Hart to complete the ritual and reseal the relic. As the storm subsides and the church falls silent, Dr. Hart is left to mourn her friend and grapple with the knowledge that some secrets are better left buried. The Black Nun of Moreton Bay. In the quiet town of Queensland, Australia, nestled among towering eucalyptus trees, stands an old Catholic church. Its weathered stone walls whisper of forgotten prayers, its stained glass windows catching the fading light of the setting sun. Yet, beneath its sacred aura lies a chilling legend that has gripped the town for generations. The tale of the Black Nun. Decades ago, when the church was a thriving sanctuary for worshippers, a devoted nun named Sister Eleanor served within its hallowed halls. She was known for her kindness and unwavering faith, spending her days tending to the sick, teaching orphan children, and offering solace to those in need. But beneath the surface of holiness, envy and deception lurked. A scandalous crime had shaken the town. A valuable relic had vanished from the church's altar, and fingers were quickly pointed. Rumors spread like wildfire, and whispers grew louder, accusing Sister Eleanor of the theft. Despite her pleas of innocence, she was branded a traitor to the faith. The church elders, unwilling to let scandal tarnish their reputation, chose a dark and cruel punishment. One fateful night, as rain lashed against the church's stone walls, Sister Eleanor was led to a hidden chamber beneath the cathedral. The priests and a few townsfolk, their faces shrouded in the dim candlelight, ignored her sobs as they sealed her inside a hollowed-out section of the wall. Buried alive within the very house of God she had served so faithfully. Days passed. Some claimed to hear faint scratching from inside the walls. Others spoke of soft, desperate wails carried through the corridors at night. But the church silenced all rumors, declaring the matter closed. Life moved on. The years rolled by. Yet, the past does not stay buried. Strange occurrences began to unsettle the churchgoers. Cold gusts of wind would rush through the nave, even when the doors were shut. Candles flickered and snuffed out on their own. At night, a shadowy figure in a tattered black habit was seen gliding through the graveyard, her face obscured beneath a deep hood. Parishioners reported an oppressive weight of sorrow washing over them, an inexplicable feeling of grief and despair, so overwhelming it left them gasping for air. Some who dared to pray alone after dark claimed they heard a voice whispering from the walls, a fragile, broken plea. I am innocent. I am innocent. The most terrifying encounters, however, belonged to those who met her face to face. A priest once locked up the church for the night, only to turn and see her standing at the altar. He described her veil as moving, though there was no breeze, and her eyes, two hollow voids of darkness, held a sorrow so deep it nearly drove him mad. The church remains standing to this day, though fewer dare to enter after nightfall. Some claim she lingers still, bound to the place where her life was unjustly taken, searching for justice that will never come. But beware, for those who doubt her existence often find themselves waking in the dead of night to the sound of soft, muffled wailing, as if someone is still trapped behind the walls, begging to be freed. As the years passed, the legend of Sister Eleanor, the Black Nun, grew stronger, woven into the fabric of local folklore. It wasn't just the churchgoers who had their tales to tell. Those who lived nearby began to notice peculiar signs in the days leading up to major storms or on the rare nights when the moon was obscured by heavy clouds. Farmers reported that their cattle would act strangely, lowing in the dead of night, as if sensing an unseen presence. A child once wandered too close to the church grounds, and when found, was shaking uncontrollably, muttering that a figure in black had whispered her name. One particularly chilling event occurred when a group of local teenagers, eager to test their bravery, decided to spend the night inside the church. Armed with nothing but a few flashlights and a bottle of wine, they made their way to the back pews and dared each other to stay. They had heard the stories, the wailing, the shadowy figure, but dismissed it as nothing more than ghost stories for children. As the hours wore on, the group's laughter and playful bravado began to fade into uneasy silence. The oppressive atmosphere inside the church seemed to thicken with each passing minute, like the very air had become heavier, more suffocating. Their voices echoed through the empty hall, but no one could shake the growing sense of being watched. Suddenly, one of the teens, Mark, pointed toward the altar, his face pale. The others turned, only to see a dark figure standing at the foot of the steps. At first, they thought it was a trick of the light, a shadow cast by the flickering candles. But the figure remained, unmoving. The black habit seemed to absorb the light around it, the folds shifting as though caught in a wind that never arrived. Then, the unmistakable sound of wailing cut through the air. Soft at first, then growing louder, agonizing, despairing cries that seemed to emanate from the very walls. The teens stood frozen, terror locking their feet to the floor. The figure stepped forward, gliding with eerie grace. The closer it came, the more its details became clear. A veil, once white, but now stained and tattered with time, hanging loosely over a face that was never seen. Only the blackness behind the veil remained, deep and endless, like a void where nothing could escape. The air grew cold, a chill so intense it left them breathless, and one by one, they turned to flee. But the church doors had locked themselves, seemingly of their own accord. Panic set in as the group banged on the heavy wooden doors, but their cries for help were drowned by the wails of the black nun, now echoing through every corner of the church. When they finally managed to break free and ran into the night, none of them spoke for days. Their eyes were hollow, their faces drawn, as if part of them had remained in that church, caught in the grip of Sister Eleanor's sorrow. But the legend doesn't end there. Another peculiar incident occurred years later, when the church decided to conduct renovations. The workers, tasked with reinforcing the old walls, stumbled upon something chilling, a hidden, sealed-off room behind the altar. Inside, they found remnants of something long forgotten, fragments of a nun's habit, a broken rosary, and what appeared to be an old journal, its pages yellowed with age. The journal, written in delicate script, detailed Sister Eleanor's final days within the walls, her growing madness, and the horrible truth that had been hidden. She had been buried alive. But even more terrifying was the final entry. I can feel the walls closing in. They've abandoned me. My cries will be heard. The truth will come to light. I will have my justice. Forever. And in the margins of the last page, a cryptic symbol was drawn, one that resembled an ancient religious seal. But there was something wrong about it, something that made the workers' skin crawl. To this day, visitors claim the air in that room is thick with dread, and no one who dares to stay after sundown is ever left untouched. Those who enter the church at night report hearing the faintest echo of a voice, Sister Eleanor's voice, calling out to them, pleading for help. Some even claim that if they listen closely enough, they can hear the unmistakable sound of bones shifting, as if someone is still trying to break free from within the very walls. Local legends have it that the black nun will never rest, that her spirit will continue to haunt the church, seeking to unearth the truth of her wrongful death. Some say that, on the eve of the full moon, if you stand near the church and listen closely enough, you can hear the faint whisper of a prayer, not for salvation, but for vengeance. The question remains, will Sister Eleanor's ghost ever find the justice she seeks? Or will she remain trapped in the shadows forever, her wailing never-ending, her restless spirit forever bound to the church that betrayed her? The cursed Church of San Juan Parangaricutiro. In the rugged mountains of Michoacan, Mexico, the land is steeped in ancient legends and supernatural mysteries. Among the most chilling of these is the tale of the Church of San Juan Parangaricutiro, a haunting symbol of both nature's fury and the spectral unknown. The church, now a lone relic of a lost town, stands defiantly amid the charred remains of the once thriving village, a place where the veil between the living and the dead is said to be unnaturally thin. It all began in 1943, when the mighty Paracutan, volcano awakened from centuries of slumber. The eruption was fierce and relentless, spewing torrents of ash and molten lava that quickly swallowed the town of San Juan Parangaricutiro. Entire homes, crops, and businesses were consumed in the fiery wave, and the people were forced to flee for their lives. Amid the chaos and destruction, many believed that the eruption had been a divine punishment, a retribution from the gods for sins unknown. However, in the wake of the disaster, there was one shocking anomaly. The town's church, an imposing structure with a tall steeple and intricate stonework, remained standing, its altar and bell tower rising out of the sea of blackened lava like a forgotten monument to a bygone era. But what should have been a symbol of survival soon became a symbol of foreboding. Locals began to whisper of strange happenings within the ruins. The lava, once molten and dangerous, had hardened in such a way that the church seemed almost as if it had been entombed in stone, a frozen relic of a tragic past. As the years went by, strange occurrences began to plague those who visited the site. On quiet, moonless nights, travelers and the few brave souls who dared to enter the ruins reported hearing soft, haunting hymns drifting from the direction of the altar. The melodies were mournful, as if the very stones of the church were weeping for those lost to the eruption. The hymns would come and go, fading with the wind, leaving behind only the eerie silence of the deserted town. Some who ventured closer to the altar claimed to see shadowy figures walking among the ruins, flickering just at the edge of their vision. At first, they thought the figures were merely the result of their imagination, or the mirage of heat shimmering above the lava flow. But when they blinked and looked again, the figures remained, moving with an unnatural fluidity, as though not fully bound to the physical world. As the years passed, a pattern emerged. Those who visited the church and stayed too long reported feeling an overwhelming sense of unease and foreboding, as if they were being watched by unseen eyes. The air would grow unnaturally heavy, thick with an oppressive silence that seemed to wrap itself around the visitors like a shroud. And in the distance, far below the hardened lava crust, a faint wail would rise, too faint to be sure of. Was it the wind, or something darker that stirred beneath the earth? The church's bell tower, though cracked and blackened from the heat of the lava, still stood resolutely. But the bell itself, curiously, would sometimes toll, its resonant sound echoing over the desolate landscape. No one could explain how it happened. There was no one in the tower to pull the ropes. And yet, when the bell tolled, it wasn't a sound of triumph or survival. It was a mournful toll, as if it were marking a loss, a reminder of the lives in the town that had been consumed by the volcano. Local folklore surrounding the church grew darker with time. It was said that the eruption had not only claimed the town, but also the souls of the departed, who were trapped in the land where they perished. The church, standing tall amid the blackened earth, became a prison for these spirits, who were bound by an unseen force. Locals believed that the souls of the dead, particularly those who had perished in the eruption, now wandered the ruins in search of peace that would never come. Some of the more superstitious villagers, especially the elderly, would avoid the area entirely, speaking of the curse that had befallen San Juan Parangaricutiro. According to them, the church had been marked by the spirits of the volcano itself, and that those who dared to disturb its sacred grounds would suffer the same fate as those who had been claimed by the lava, lost forever in the fires of time. The most terrifying legend of all was the story of the priest who had been trapped in the church when the eruption began. According to the tale, Father Benito had refused to leave the church during the eruption, determined to pray for the safety of the townsfolk. But when the lava overtook the town, the priest was overcome by the suffocating heat and flames. His body was never recovered, but some claim that his restless spirit still lingers in the church, guarding the entrance to the afterlife, refusing to allow the souls of the dead to find rest. a group of curious adventurers, eager to uncover the truth behind the ghostly stories, once ventured into the church ruins. As they explored the hollowed-out altar, they reported that the air grew ice-cold, and their breaths became visible in the dim light of their flashlights. Some claimed to have seen Father Benito's figure standing at the altar, his face a shadow beneath his hood, his hands raised as though in eternal prayer. The sight was so unsettling that the group fled, abandoning their investigation in fear. To this day, the Church of San Juan Parangaricutiro stands as a silent sentinel to the past, a landmark not only of historical significance, but of unspeakable tragedy and supernatural mystery. Visitors come to witness the eerie sight of the altar and steeple rising from the lava, and to ponder the strange stories that surround the site. But few stay after nightfall, for those who do often speak of an overwhelming feeling of being watched, as if the very land itself is alive, aware, and perhaps still angry. Some believe that the volcano's eruption was not just an act of nature, but a curse, an ancient punishment for the sins of the land, and that the church, still standing amidst the ruins, remains a portal, a gateway to a realm where the living and the dead are forever intertwined, bound by the flames of an unforgiving faith. The ghostly organ of St. Mark's Church. St. Mark's Church, nestled in the quiet, rolling hills of Lincolnshire, England, is a place of history, reverence, and for those who know the legend, a lingering, spectral presence. The church, with its ancient stone walls and towering spire, has long been a symbol of devotion and peace for the local community. But hidden within its sacred halls is a darker story, a tale of a devoted organist whose spirit is said to forever haunt the church, playing his beloved instrument long after his death. The organist, John Wilkins, was a man deeply entwined with the music of St. Mark's. He had served as the church's organist for over 40 years, his hands caressing the keys with skill and passion. His music was renowned throughout the village, and many who heard him play spoke of the profound emotions his music could evoke. A melody so moving it could bring tears to the eyes of even the hardest of hearts. His devotion to the organ was unmatched, and he was known to practice for hours after services had ended, often staying long into the night, as the moonlight streamed through the stained glass windows, casting eerie shadows across the pews. However, despite his deep love for the church and its music, John Wilkins was not destined for a long life. In the late 1800s, after a particularly cold winter, he fell ill. The disease struck quickly, and within weeks, the once vibrant organist was bedridden. The villagers prayed for his recovery, but it was to no avail. On a quiet evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, John Wilkins passed away, his final breath taken with the thought of the organ he would never play again. The church mourned his passing, and for a time, the organ stood silent, its pipes cold and lifeless. But something strange began to happen, something that no one could explain. It started on a cold autumn evening, just after the sun had set. The church was locked up, its doors sealed tight, the windows shut against the growing chill. But as the village slept, a soft, haunting melody began to drift from the church. At first, it was subtle, just a faint echo of notes, almost like a distant memory of a song. But as the days went by, the music became louder and more distinct until it was clear. Someone was playing the organ. The villagers were baffled. The church had been locked, and the organ, a massive and intricate instrument, could not be played without someone at the keys. But time and again, the ghostly music was heard, phantom organ music filling the empty church. Those brave enough to venture into the church late at night reported hearing the unmistakable sound of John Wilkins' favorite compositions, the same pieces he had spent countless hours perfecting. The music would rise in volume, the chords growing richer and more complex, only to fade into silence just as mysteriously as it had begun. Some say they saw his figure standing in the shadows near the organ, a spectral silhouette bathed in moonlight. John Wilkins, dressed in his dark, old-fashioned clothes, his hands hovering over the keys as if still in the act of playing. But when the living dared approach, the apparition would vanish, leaving behind only the echoes of his music. Others who worked at the church, particularly the caretakers and staff, were often the ones most affected by the strange occurrences. One caretaker, an elderly woman who had served St. Mark's for nearly 2 decades, reported hearing the music regularly when she came to open the church at dawn. The haunting melody seemed to follow her through the empty halls, filling the air with sorrow and longing. Sometimes she would find the organ keys pressed down, as though someone had played it, but no one would be there, and the organ would be locked tight, just as it had been before. The local priest, Father Gregory, was skeptical of the rumors at first. He dismissed them as the product of overactive imaginations. But one evening, after a late service, he stayed behind to perform some quiet tasks in the church. As he walked through the nave, the sound of the organ filled the air, though he knew the church was empty. He followed the haunting music to the organ loft and, to his surprise, found the instrument playing itself. No one at the keys, but the air around it thick with an eerie presence. Father Gregory felt an icy chill grip his heart as he saw the shadow of a man standing by the organ, his form flickering and vanishing with each note. It was then that Father Gregory understood. John Wilkins' spirit was trapped in the church, forever bound to the organ he had loved so dearly. There was no escaping the music that had consumed him in life, and now it was the very thing that held him in the afterlife. Over the years, other visitors to St. Mark's have claimed to hear the faint strains of organ music, especially on moonlit nights. The music is always haunting, always melancholic, and never fully of this world. Some say the melody has changed over time, becoming darker and more dissonant, as if the organist's spirit is becoming more restless, more desperate for release. A few have claimed to see a shadowy figure standing near the organ during services, watching with longing eyes, as though waiting for someone to relieve him of his eternal duty. And some claim that when the wind blows just right, you can hear the faintest whisper of his voice, carried on the breeze through the cracks of the church windows, still calling for his music to be heard. The church remains a place of worship, but it is also a landmark of supernatural curiosity, a site where the living and the dead seem to coexist in a strange harmony. For those who believe in the legend, it is a reminder of the devotion that binds a soul to its earthly passions, even beyond death. And for those who hear the organ play in the dead of night, it is a chilling reminder that sometimes the music never stops. Over time, word of the haunted organ at St. Mark's Church spread far beyond the village. Curious travelers and thrill-seekers would come from distant towns, and even from abroad, hoping to catch a glimpse of the famous ghost or to hear the haunting music for themselves. Some came with a sense of reverence, believing that the organist's spirit was simply paying homage to his life's work. Others came with more selfish intentions, eager to prove or disprove the legend, hoping to find a way to unlock the mystery of the church. One particular visitor was a man named Thomas Blake, an amateur historian and self-proclaimed paranormal investigator who believed that every ghost had a story that could be solved if only one knew the right questions to ask. He had heard rumors of the haunted organ and decided to spend a week in St. Mark's, hoping to communicate with the spirit and perhaps even help him find peace. Blake was convinced that if the right ritual was performed, he could sever the connection between John Wilkins' spirit and the organ, freeing the trapped soul once and for all. Blake arrived one misty evening, long after the village had settled into slumber. He was prepared, his camera in hand, his notepad filled with notes on the history of the organist, and his mind set on discovering the truth. He entered the church quietly, setting up his equipment around the organ loft. The air felt heavy, and the dim light of the single candle he carried flickered against the cold stone walls. For a moment, the church seemed entirely still, almost too still, as if it were holding its breath. Blake sat in silence for hours, waiting, watching, listening. Then, as midnight approached, the first faint notes of music began to play. Soft, delicate chords, just like those described by the villagers. Blake's heart quickened. He had expected this. He knew it would happen. But as the melody grew louder and more complex, something shifted. The music became more chaotic, more desperate, as though the organists were fighting against some unseen force. Blake's pulse raced, and he stepped forward, intent on speaking with the ghost. "John Wilkins," Blake called into the stillness. "I know you're here. We know your story. Your music has been heard. It's time to rest." The music abruptly stopped. Silence blanketed the church. Blake's breath caught in his throat as he looked around. The air had grown colder, and for a moment, he felt a presence standing behind him, a weight, as though the very church were watching him. Then, from the shadows near the organ, a figure began to emerge. It was John Wilkins, or at least what remained of him. His form was translucent, flickering like an old, fading photograph, his figure draped in a long, dark coat. His face, though blurry and indistinct, exuded a profound sadness. In his hands, he held an invisible set of keys, as if the organ were still under his control. His eyes locked onto Blake's, and the air became suffocating. Blake tried again, his voice more urgent this time. "You don't have to play anymore, John. You've been heard. Your music has moved generations. Let go." The figure didn't respond immediately. Instead, it seemed to drift toward the organ, fingers outstretched. And then, the most terrifying thing happened. The organ began to play again, but not the soft melodies Blake had heard earlier. This time, the sound was discordant, sharp, and twisted, a cacophony of sound that filled the entire church like a thunderstorm. The force of the music seemed to rattle the very bones of the church, and Blake felt an overwhelming sense of dread wash over him, as if the church itself were fighting back against his intrusion. With trembling hands, Blake reached for the organ keys, desperate to stop the madness. But as his fingers touched the cold, smooth ivory, he was struck by an invisible force. He was thrown back against the wall, the wind knocked out of him, and the music grew louder, more aggressive. Blake could feel the spirit of John Wilkins, more powerful and furious than ever, trapped in the sound of his own creation. For a fleeting moment, the organist's face shifted, revealing something terrifying. His face was contorted in agony, as if the music were his punishment. The haunting melody began to echo through the village, waking those who lived nearby. They ran to the church, drawn by the terrifying music, only to find Blake lying unconscious near the organ, his body pale and drenched in sweat. The music stopped as suddenly as it had begun, and the church fell silent once more. Blake never spoke of what happened that night. He left the village the next morning, pale and shaken, and never returned. Some say that he never recovered from the experience, that the haunting melodies stayed with him long after he had left St. Mark's. Years passed, and the church remained a site of pilgrimage for the curious and the brave. But the legend grew darker, for no one could find a way to free the organist's spirit. It seemed that John Wilkins was not simply bound to the organ because of his devotion to his music, but because his spirit had become fused with the very instrument he had loved. Some said that every time the organ played, it recreated his torment, his soul crying out in eternal agony, forever trapped by the music he had once created out of love. A few locals still speak of the organist, especially when the moon is high and the wind is still. They claim that on certain nights, when the church stands empty and the air is thick with the weight of time. The sound of a single organ note can be heard, carried on the wind to the farthest reaches of the village. And though many have tried to end the haunting, no one has succeeded. For John Wilkins plays on, his music forever echoing through the sacred halls of St. Mark's Church, a ghost whose passion for music turned into an eternal curse. The Witch's Grave in St. Mary's Church. St. Mary's Church, perched atop the windswept cliffs of Whitby, England, is known for its stunning vistas, its association with Bram Stoker's Dracula, and the haunting echoes of history that seem to pulse through its very walls. Yet, despite its literary fame, there is a darker, more sinister story that haunts this ancient church, one that predates Stoker's tale and lingers like a shadow over the windswept gravestones of the churchyard. It is a story of a woman accused of being a witch, who met a grisly end and was buried on unhallowed ground. Her name has been lost to time, but the whispers surrounding her death and the eerie events that followed have persisted for centuries. This is the tale of the Witch of Whitby, whose restless spirit still roams the churchyard, ensuring that her grave is never disturbed. The woman, often referred to as Eliza Gray, was a healer and midwife living in Whitby during the 17th century. Known for her knowledge of herbs, potions, and traditional remedies, Eliza was respected by some and feared by others. The local community, gripped by superstition and suspicion, began to see her as more than just a healer. Her skill in using natural remedies, especially for ailments that defied conventional understanding, was seen by many as unnatural, even evil. As the story goes, Eliza was accused of witchcraft after a particularly bitter winter. Several children in the village fell ill with strange, unexplainable symptoms, and the local clergy, desperate for an explanation, turned their suspicions toward Eliza. Rumors spread that her potions had turned the children into victims of dark magic. In a time when fear of the supernatural ran deep, it didn't take much for the mob mentality to take hold. The town's elders and a group of fearful villagers decided to put an end to Eliza's supposed witchcraft. She was captured in the dead of night, brought before the village court, and tried in a hastily convened trial. With no evidence to disprove the accusations, Eliza was found guilty of witchcraft, a charge that was enough to seal her fate. Eliza was executed in the square, her life taken by the flames of a public burning. As the fire consumed her body, the villagers swore they could hear her blood-curdling screams rise above the crackle of the flames. But what was even more chilling was the curse she supposedly uttered just before she died. According to the legend, Eliza swore vengeance upon those who had wronged her, declaring that her spirit would never rest, that she would haunt the village and return to punish those who dared disturb her grave. Her body was thrown unceremoniously into a grave in the churchyard of St. Mary's, but not on consecrated ground. Instead, it was buried at the very edge of the churchyard, where the earth was said to be unhallowed due to its proximity to the cliffs and the sea, a place where the supernatural was said to have no limits, where the boundaries between the living and the dead were thin. Soon after her burial, strange things began to happen. Locals reported seeing a shadowy figure drifting near the churchyard at night, moving between the gravestones with unsettling speed. The figure was said to be clad in dark robes, and her face was always obscured in shadow, though those who glimpsed her could feel an overwhelming sense of dread. On moonless nights, when the wind howled over the cliffs and the churchyard fell silent, the faint sound of chanting could be heard in the air, coming from the direction of Eliza's grave. The words were unintelligible, but they carried a weight of sorrow and rage. It was said that anyone who dared approach the grave would feel a sudden chill in the air, followed by a feeling of being watched by eyes that never blinked. Over the years, the churchyard became infamous among the locals. They would tell their children to stay away from the grave at night, warning them that to disturb the witch's resting place would bring nothing but misfortune. There were rumors of people who, after daring to touch the gravestone or even speak her name, found their lives cursed. Some of them fell ill, others suffered from inexplicable accidents, and a few mysteriously vanished altogether. The most well-known of these disappearances occurred in the early 1800s when a group of young men, drunk on spirits and daring each other to tempt fate, decided to uncover the mystery of Eliza's grave. Armed with little more than bravado, they ventured into the churchyard after midnight, determined to defy the warnings and disturb the grave. The next morning, only one of them returned to town, pale and disheveled, mumbling incoherently about something they had seen near the grave, a figure in the shadows, her eyes burning with fury. He claimed to have heard a woman's voice whispering, calling them to come closer, but he couldn't remember what happened after that. The others were never found, and the one survivor was said to have been plagued by nightmares for the rest of his life. Some say he died shortly after, his body found in a remote part of the village, his face frozen in a grotesque expression of terror. As the years passed, St. Mary's Churchyard gained a reputation as one of the most haunted places in the region. Ghost hunters and thrill seekers flocked to Whitby in the hopes of encountering the restless spirit of the witch. Many claim to have heard the sound of footsteps trailing behind them as they walked through the graveyard at night, or to have seen a figure darting between the tombstones, just out of reach. Some even reported hearing a woman's voice calling their names, coaxing them closer, but when they turned to look, no one was there. One ghost hunter, a seasoned investigator named Edward Cross, tried to capture evidence of the witch's haunting presence in the early 20th century. Armed with cameras, recording equipment, and protective charms, he ventured into the churchyard alone. As the night deepened, he set up his equipment near Eliza's grave, determined to communicate with the spirit. For hours, he waited in silence, but nothing happened. Just as he was about to give up, the temperature around him plummeted. A cold wind howled through the churchyard, and then he heard it, a faint whisper in his ear, too soft to understand. He turned to face the direction of the grave, and as he did, his camera's flash went off, capturing a shadowy figure standing in the very spot where Eliza had been buried. The image was blurry, but unmistakable, the silhouette of a woman, her eyes glowing with an unnatural light. Edward, unnerved, quickly packed his equipment and fled the churchyard. The footage, however, became a part of ghost hunting lore, with many declaring it to be one of the most compelling pieces of evidence of the supernatural. Today, St. Mary's Church and its haunted churchyard still attract those who seek the thrill of the unknown, but the witch's grave remains undisturbed. Locals continue to warn visitors that Eliza Gray's spirit is not one to be trifled with, and that disturbing her final resting place will only bring more death and misfortune. The grave remains a symbol of the curse that was laid upon the village so many years ago, and the chilling reminder that some spirits, no matter how long they've been gone, never truly leave. Thank you all for watching. Please like and subscribe for more scary stories.